Hi, and welcome to another episode of pianoTV. So today we are going to do a piano tutorial on that super famous Canon in D song that most people don't necessarily know by name, but kind of know as like that wedding song. So what I want to do in today's episode is talk a little bit about the history of the piece and give you like some backstory on Canon in D. And I'm going to play it for you and link to a sheet music arrangement that I've made for this video. That's like about a beginner level. Like you probably want to be playing for 6 months to a year before you play this, but it's not super hard. It's only 2 pages. And then I want to pick it apart and talk about a couple of theory tidbits. So let's jump into it. There are what basically seems like infinite amounts of arrangements for Canon in D. So honestly, like choose your own adventure based on what level you're at. If you're an advanced piano player, you can do a quick Google search and find like hundreds of advanced level Canon in D sheet music. So, or you can kind of go off the beaten path and make up your own version. So if you have an idea of what the basic tune is and how to play that, you can do your own spin-off and variations in the left hand and right hand. So I invite you to go wild with this piece and not necessarily feel like you have to just like religiously stick to what's on the page. But first things first, let's talk about the backstory. So Canon in D is also sometimes called Pachelbel's Canon because, you guessed it, it's written by a guy named Pachelbel. Pachelbel was a German composer who existed and wrote music in the Baroque period, which is the 17th century. So that's a lot older than a lot of people assume this song is, so just kind of like interesting tidbit. But one thing that tends to happen to music over the ages is it goes in and out of style. So when Pachelbel lived and did his thing, he was like pretty well respected and people liked him and knew his music. But then the classical era rolled around and then no one really cared about Baroque music anymore, and it just kind of like fell by the wayside. It was like old hat. But then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, people started to rediscover Baroque music, and they were like, oh hey, this is actually pretty cool, and they like brought it back. So in the 1900s, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we saw a resurgence of Canon in D, and that's kind of how it became entrenched in pop culture. Basically, someone made a recording of it in 1968, and it got really big, and then a lot of other imitators made their own recordings of Canon in D, and then by the 80s, you know, everyone knew it. So I was talking with one of my students recently on why this song was called Canon in D. So for those of you who may or may not know, a canon is a type of song that is based on imitation. So what that means on piano is a lot of the times the right hand might play something and then the left hand copies it. But when we play Canon in D on piano, it's not like that at all. It's just like chords in the left hand and then a melody in the right hand. So where's the canon? And it took me way too long to realize it's because it wasn't originally written for keyboard. That's just, you know, people transcribing it. So the original version of Pachelbel's Canon was scored for 3 violins, which do the canon part, and we'll talk about that in a second, and then a basso continuo part, which is basically just like a low bass instrument, like say a cello, and then a keyboard, kind of like filling in the harmony in the empty space. So I want to take a listen to an audio clip and show you how this canon thing works. So first of all, we have our 3 violins. The first violin is like the leader, and then the other 2 violins are just playing copycat. So the violin is going to enter for about 10 seconds all by itself, playing a little part. And then after that 10 seconds, the violin 1 is going to keep going. The second violin is going to come in and directly copy what the first violin did, but like staggered by a couple bars. Then it's going to keep going, and then the third violin is going to come in about 10 seconds later and copy what the first violin did. But now it's staggered, so you have violin 1 starts here, violin 2, and then violin 3 is over here. So it's kind of neat. I just want you to take a listen to that really quick. So now that we've talked about the backstory of the piece and kind of have talked about like what the title means and how to decode that, I'm going to show you the piano arrangement that I've done. And the sheet music's going to go on the screen, but if you're interested in learning this arrangement, as always, I have a PDF link below in the description bar. So let's start with the basics. This song is called Canon in D for two reasons, because it's a canon and because this is an easy one. It's in the key of D. And you can see this is true by taking a look at the key signature, which has two sharps, just like the key of D. So all this is basically telling you, because you can see where they're kind of positioned, is that in this song you got to watch out for F sharps. So every single F you encounter is going to be sharp, and you got to watch out for C sharps. We also have this Italian marking largo, which just means to play this song slow. Again, that should be fairly obvious if you've listened to Canon in D before. So as most of you know, the next thing I like to do when I'm decoding a song is take a look through it to see if there's any patterns, if there's any rhyme or reason to the randomness of the notes, or if there's patterns or things like that. So what I noticed right away, and this is partly, you know, because I arranged this song, so hopefully I noticed the patterns after writing it, but if you quickly glance through, you'll notice there's a 4-bar pattern here. So the left hand starts on a D, and then it goes through this sequence, and then over here on bar number 5, it starts the exact same sequence again. You can kind of see this D, A, B, F thing going on here. And this is a direct replica. And even when we migrate to this next part where there's quarter notes instead of half notes, you can still see the D, A, B, F thing continuing. So it's not changing. I'm just gonna keep scanning through the notes for if the left hand looks like the left hand's still doing the same thing. And over here, the left hand changes a bit. So let's see if it's still our same pattern. D, bunch of notes, A, B, F, exactly the same thing. So the main pattern in this song is the 4-bar left hand thing that just goes through the same cycle of notes over and over again. So we just figured out like the overarching left hand pattern, but there's actually a pattern within a pattern that I think is really cool and just sort of worth pointing out here. So I'm going to do that. So if you go from D to A, if you go down, this distance here is a fourth. And then these two notes you're going up, that distance is a second. And if you kind of look through this, fourth, second, fourth, second, fourth, and then the pattern changes. But you basically, it's what we call in music sequence. You just kind of have this repeating pattern of like equivalent distances, and then on this very last bar it changes just because we have to give it a sense of resolution. So this is going from the subdominant to the dominant, because if we're in the key of D, A is the 5th note, so that's the dominant, which is the perfect lead-in to repeat the cycle for infinity. The dominant just always has this like incomplete leading sound to it, and that's why to me, like it always sounds like it leaves you wanting more, and that's why I think it's the perfect lead-in back to the tonic, back to D, which is what key we're playing this song in. One other note that I want to make is I actually didn't end up writing any fingering marks. Like there's no finger numbers here, and there's also no dynamics. Usually I do when I'm making arrangements, but I don't know, well, partly I was a little lazy, but sometimes I think it's a good idea to just figure out how to make your own way through an arrangement. So if you end up, say, printing this out, what I would do is then like manually, like when you're playing through it, manually add some of your own finger marks in, like maybe, you know, if you want to remember to start on your thumb there and maybe like cross over to your thumb here or something, make those marks for yourself, just because consistency with finger patterns is super important when you're learning how to play a piece. As far as the dynamics go, like the louds and softs, I just am assuming you've heard this piece enough times in your life that you should have a general sense of its mood. Like, you're probably not going to start out this song at like a blasting fortissimo, you know, unless you're feeling really adventurous. Generally, the pattern I like to follow with this song is just follow the intensity of the right hand. As the right hand gets busier and more convoluted, make it a little louder as it goes until you get to the 16th note part where, you know, the right hand's going crazy, and then like over here, and then you can make that nice and loud, and then once it starts going back to like quarter notes and, you know, gentle 8th notes and stuff over here, you can make it quieter again. That's the basic dynamic plan I follow when I play this song. And that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the PDF is always linked below, as well as the blog post if you want to go check that out. I always include on the blog like basically like a write-up of everything that I talk about if, you know, instead of watching videos you'd like to read or do that kind of thing. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I will catch you guys next time. I'm just gonna do it again. I'm just gonna leave it rolling.